April 11th, 1945. Waters off Okinawa. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Lieutenant Junior Grade Seki Yukio pushed the throttle forward on his Mitsubishi A6M Zero. Behind him, 4 more pilots from the 8th Special Attack Squadron followed in formation, their aircraft stripped of everything except bombs and enough fuel for a one-way journey. They had rehearsed this approach a dozen times at Kanoya Air Base. Fly low over the water to avoid early detection. Strike fast before the American Combat Air Patrol could intercept. Aim for the carriers if possible, otherwise any large vessel would do. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What none of these young men understood was that they were already being watched. 37 miles to the east, aboard the battleship USS Missouri, a 6-foot dish antenna rotated steadily atop its trailer mount. The SCR-584 radar system had detected their approach the moment they cleared land, tracking their altitude, speed, and precise heading with an accuracy no Japanese commander had thought possible. The radar's ranging data fed directly into an M9 director, an analog computer that calculated firing solutions faster than any human gunner could manage. Within seconds, 4 90mm anti-aircraft guns swiveled to face the incoming threat, their crews loading proximity-fused shells that would detonate automatically when they passed within lethal range of an aircraft. The kamikaze pilots never reached their targets. One by one, their aircraft disintegrated in the air, torn apart by shell bursts that seemed to find them with supernatural accuracy. Lieutenant Seki's Zero took a proximity-fused shell at 800 yards, the explosion shredding his aircraft's wing and sending it spiraling into the sea. His wingmen died similarly, their desperate final dives cut short by an invisible wall of fire controlled by a radar system they did not know existed and could not have countered even if they had. This scene would repeat itself thousands of times during the Okinawa campaign, as American radar technology and automated fire control transformed kamikaze attacks from devastating weapons into costly failures. The mathematical certainty of Japanese tactical innovation was being written not in the courage of pilots willing to die for their emperor, but in the electromagnetic frequencies that Japanese equipment could neither generate nor detect. The mathematics of aerial suicide warfare had changed fundamentally, and Japan's commanders were about to discover just how thoroughly American industrial and scientific superiority had rendered their most desperate tactic obsolete. The evolution of kamikaze tactics did not emerge from strategic planning or careful doctrinal development. It arose from desperation, born in the aftermath of catastrophic losses that had stripped Japan of both experienced pilots and serviceable aircraft. In June of 1944, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, American carrier aircraft and anti-aircraft fire destroyed approximately 600 Japanese planes in what American pilots would later call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The losses were unsustainable. Japan's naval aviation, once the most feared strike force in the Pacific, had been reduced to a shadow of its former capability. Vice Admiral Onishi Takejiro, commander of the 1st Air Fleet in the Philippines, recognized that conventional air attacks had become suicidal, regardless of pilot intentions. American fighter aircraft now outnumbered Japanese planes by ratios exceeding 10-1 in some operations. American pilots had accumulated hundreds of hours of combat experience, while Japanese replacements often had fewer than 100 hours of total flight time. The technological gap had widened an unbridgeable chasm. American aircraft carriers deployed radar systems that could detect incoming raids at distances exceeding 100 miles, giving combat air patrol pilots ample time to intercept attackers before they could threaten the fleet. In late October of 1944, as American forces prepared to invade the Philippine island of Leyte, Onishi proposed formation of the Special Attack Units, what would become known by the codename Shinpu Tokubetsu Kogeki Tai, meaning Divine Wind Special Attack Corps. The tactical logic, if not the moral implications, seemed straightforward. A conventional bomber attacking an American carrier required precision under fire to release its bomb or torpedo at the optimal moment, tasks that poorly trained pilots could rarely accomplish against intense anti-aircraft fire and determined fighter opposition. A kamikaze pilot needed only to crash his aircraft into the target, turning the entire plane and its fuel load into a guided missile that could not be evaded and would not miss if the pilot reached striking distance. The first organized kamikaze attack launched on October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Aircraft from the Special Attack Corps attacked escort carriers of Taffy 3, a formation of 6 escort carriers and their destroyer escorts off the coast of Samar. Kamikaze pilots sank the escort carrier USS St. Lo and damaged several other vessels. The success seemed to validate Onishi's concept. In the 3 months of operations during the Philippines campaign, kamikaze attacks would sink or damage nearly 100 American ships, causing more damage than all previous Pacific Theater air attacks combined. The initial American response to these new tactics was shock, followed by urgent concern. Traditional defensive measures seemed inadequate against pilots who actively sought collision, rather than avoiding defensive fire. Fighter interception remained effective, but kamikazes, who reached the screening distance around American task forces, proved difficult to stop with anti-aircraft fire alone. Naval intelligence analysis from October 1944 through January 1945 showed alarming trends. Of approximately 1,400 Japanese aircraft that attacked American forces during this period, 352 were identified as kamikazes. These suicide aircraft achieved a hit rate exceeding 34%, compared to just 2% for conventional attacks. These statistics represented more than tactical inconvenience. They threatened to make the planned invasion of Okinawa, and potentially the Japanese home islands themselves, prohibitively costly in ships and lives. If kamikaze attacks could maintain this effectiveness rate, American naval forces would face unsustainable losses during amphibious operations that required them to remain in restricted waters for extended periods. The Japanese had discovered, through desperation rather than innovation, a tactic that appeared to negate American advantages in training, aircraft performance, and numerical superiority. What Japanese commanders did not yet understand was that American defensive technology was evolving rapidly to counter this new threat. 3 innovations, developed largely in parallel and deployed with increasing effectiveness during 1945, would transform the kamikaze from a devastating weapon into a futile gesture. These were the SCR-584 fire control radar, the proximity fuse for anti-aircraft shells, and the M9 gun director, an analog computer that automated the complex calculations required for accurate anti-aircraft fire. Individually, each system represented significant technological advancement. Combined into an integrated defense system, they created an electromagnetic barrier that kamikaze pilots could neither see nor penetrate. The SCR-584 radar system emerged from the work of Kanoya, engineers and physicists at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Radiation Laboratory, an organization established in late 1940 specifically to develop microwave radar technology for military applications. The laboratory, known informally as the RAD Lab, brought together some of America's most capable scientists and engineers under the leadership of physicist Lee Dubridge. Their work was made possible by a British technological gift that would prove decisive in the war: the cavity magnetron, a device capable of generating powerful microwave signals at wavelengths around 10 centimeters. In September 1940, a British delegation known as the Tizard mission visited the United States, bringing with them technical specifications and a working cavity magnetron. This single device, roughly the size of a hockey puck and weighing a few pounds, could generate radio frequency power at wavelengths and power levels that American researchers had considered theoretically possible but practically unattainable. The cavity magnetron enabled development of microwave radar systems that were simultaneously more powerful, more precise, and more compact than previous long-wavelength designs. The RadLab team, overseen by engineer Ivan Getting, began work on an automatic fire control radar system in late 1940. The project faced extraordinary technical challenges. The radar needed to detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 40 miles, while maintaining tracking accuracy sufficient to direct anti-aircraft guns against fast-moving targets at shorter distances. The antenna system required a servo mechanism capable of automatically following a target once locked on, eliminating the need for manual tracking that introduced inevitable human delays and errors. Most ambitiously, the entire system needed to fit in a trailer that could be deployed rapidly wherever American forces required air defense. The team achieved a working prototype by April of 1941. Testing at Fort Monroe in February 1942 demonstrated capabilities that exceeded initial specifications. The SCR-584 operated at frequencies between 2700 and 2800 MHz, corresponding to wavelengths of approximately 10 to 11 centimeters. This microwave frequency allowed use of a relatively small parabolic antenna, 6 feet in diameter, that could fit atop the trailer housing the transmitter, receiver, and control equipment. The system transmitted 300 kilowatt pulses, lasting 0.8 of a microsecond, with a pulse repetition frequency of 1707 pulses per second. These technical specifications translated into remarkable operational capabilities. The SCR-584 could detect bomber-sized targets at ranges approaching 40 miles. Once a target came within approximately 18 miles, the system could automatically track it, following its movements with servo motors that kept the antenna pointed precisely at the aircraft. Tracking accuracy was extraordinary for the era, achieving range precision of approximately 25 yards and angular accuracy of 0.06 degrees, equivalent to 1 milliradian. This precision enabled the system to provide firing data accurate enough to direct anti-aircraft guns without human intervention beyond initial target acquisition. The automatic tracking feature represented perhaps the system's most revolutionary aspect. Previous fire control radars required operators to manually keep the antenna pointed at the target, a task that introduced inevitable delays and inaccuracies as the operator attempted to predict aircraft movements. The SCR-584 eliminated this human element once tracking lock was established. A conical scanning system rotated the radar beam in a small circle around the antenna's bore site, detecting which direction would maximize the return signal strength. The tracking servo automatically drove the antenna to follow the strongest return, maintaining lock even as targets maneuvered. The system was built in collaboration between the RAD Lab and the Central Engineering Office of Chrysler Corporation's Dodge Division. Chrysler received the contract for mass production in September 1942, with the first production unit delivered in May 1943. The Dodge main plant in Detroit, previously building B-29 engine components, converted an entire floor to SCR-584 production. Engineers and workers, many of them women recruited specifically for this classified project, assembled systems at increasing rates as production techniques improved. By the war's end, Chrysler would produce over 2,000 SCR-584 systems. Each complete unit consisted of the radar trailer housing the transmitter, receiver, antenna servo mechanisms, and display systems. The 6-foot parabolic antenna mounted atop the trailer, enclosed in a protective radome that allowed radar signals to pass through while protecting the antenna from weather and battle damage. Engineers had drilled 6,600 half-inch holes in the antenna dish to reduce wind loading, saving 70 pounds of scarce steel per unit, while ensuring the antenna would not blow over in winds up to 60 miles per hour. The system required a separate generator trailer for electrical power and could be set up for operation within 30 minutes by a trained crew. The true revolutionary potential of the SCR-584 emerged when it was integrated with 2 other critical innovations. Bell Telephone Laboratories had developed the M9 Director, an analog computer containing 160 vacuum tubes that calculated firing solutions from radar data. The M9 received azimuth, elevation, and range information from the SCR-584 and computed the necessary gun angles and shell time settings to intercept a target, accounting for aircraft speed and direction, wind conditions, and the ballistic characteristics of 90mm anti-aircraft shells. This electronic brain could perform these complex calculations in real time, updating firing solutions faster than any human gun crew could manage manually. The third element of this defensive triad was the VT proximity fuse, developed by scientists at the Applied Physics Laboratory under contract to the United States Navy. The proximity fuse represented a miniature radar transmitter and receiver built into an anti-aircraft shell. When fired, the fuse transmitted radio signals continuously as the shell flew toward its target. Upon receiving a reflection strong enough to indicate the shell had approached within lethal range of an aircraft, typically 50 to 75 feet, the fuse detonated the shell automatically. This eliminated the need to set precise time fuses that required the shell to detonate at a predetermined altitude, a calculation that was extraordinarily difficult to make accurately during combat against maneuvering targets. When deployed as an integrated system, the SCR-584 radar, M9 director, and proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells created an automated defense system of unprecedented lethality. The radar detected and tracked incoming aircraft with precision no Japanese system could match. The M9 computed firing solutions continuously as targets maneuvered. The 90mm guns, directed by data from the M9, fired proximity-fused shells that would detonate when they passed within effective range of the target, even if direct hits were not achieved. The entire engagement sequence from initial detection to first shells fired could occur in seconds, and the system could continue engaging targets automatically as long as radar lock was maintained. The first combat deployment of the SCR-584 occurred at Anzio in February 1944, where two systems arrived at the beachhead on February 24. German forces had been conducting intensive air attacks against the confined Allied positions, and conventional SCR-268 radars had proven vulnerable to jamming. On the first night after the SCR-584 units became operational, 12 German bombers entered the beachhead airspace. 7 were destroyed by radar-directed 90mm fire. German air attacks on Anzio effectively ceased for the following week. When a single reconnaissance aircraft appeared to test the defenses, it too was destroyed by SCR-584 directed fire. Additional systems deployed to Anzio ended the German air threat entirely. The system's effectiveness against the German V-1 flying bomb would demonstrate its full potential. In June 1944, Germany began launching V-1 rockets against London from sites in occupied France. These pilotless jet-powered missiles flew at speeds exceeding 320 knots, too fast for most propeller-driven fighter aircraft to intercept reliably. 20 SCR-584 systems were rushed to England's Channel coast, integrated with 80-90mm guns equipped with proximity-fused shells. The results proved devastating to the German attack. On August 28, 1944, the final day of V-1 launches before Allied ground forces overran the launch sites, Germans launched 104 von Second toward London. SCR-584 directed anti-aircraft batteries destroyed 64. Fighters accounted for 14 more. Only 4 von Second reached London, the remainder having crashed or been destroyed. The system demonstrated it could track and destroy targets moving at speeds approaching 600 miles per hour. By early 1945, production had reached sufficient levels that systems could be allocated to the Pacific Theater, where American forces were preparing for the invasion of Okinawa and confronting the mounting toll of kamikaze attacks. The SCR-584 arrived in the Philippines during the final months of 1944 and proved immediately effective. 6 systems went ashore with assault forces during amphibious operations. Within 2 weeks, SCR-584 directed guns had destroyed approximately 300 Japanese aircraft, a performance that prompted General Douglas MacArthur to commend the anti-aircraft regiment's superior shooting. The system possessed capabilities Japanese intelligence had not anticipated and Japanese technology could not replicate. Japanese radar development, hampered by inadequate funding, inter-service rivalry, and belated recognition of radar's military potential, lagged years behind Allied capabilities. Japanese fire control radars, derived from captured American SCR-268 systems, operated at wavelengths around 150 to 200 centimeters. These longer wavelengths provided less accuracy and required larger antennas that were difficult to deploy rapidly. Japanese systems lacked automatic tracking, requiring manual operation that could not maintain the precision needed for effective fire control against maneuvering targets. Most critically, Japanese electronics production could not manufacture miniature vacuum tubes in the quantities needed for advanced systems. The proximity fuse alone required rugged vacuum tubes capable of surviving the extreme acceleration of gun firing, 20,000 times the force of gravity, while remaining functional and sensitive enough to detect aircraft reflections at distances exceeding 50 feet. American industry, drawing on decades of commercial electronics manufacturing experience, produced proximity fuses at rates exceeding 70,000 per day by late 1944. Japan's electronics capability, focused primarily on communication equipment and simple search radars, simply could not produce comparable devices, even if Japanese engineers had fully understood their design and function. The SCR-584 represented more than technological superiority in any single aspect. It embodied systematic integration of multiple advanced technologies: the cavity magnetron for microwave power generation, precision servo mechanisms for automatic tracking, analog computing for fire control, and miniaturized electronics for the proximity fuse, combined into a system that functioned reliably under combat conditions. American industrial capacity enabled production of these systems in quantities sufficient to deploy them wherever needed, while maintaining quality control that ensured reliable operation. This combination of innovation, integration, and mass production created military capability Japan could not counter with the resources and industrial infrastructure available. Japanese kamikaze pilots, brave and determined though they were, found themselves attacking through an invisible barrier of electromagnetic radiation that detected them at distances where they remained unaware of the threat, tracked their approach with precision they could not evade, and directed automated fire that killed them before they could see their targets. The courage to die for one's nation, however admirable, provided no defense against microwave radar and proximity-fused shells. The Special Attack Corps had encountered the future of warfare and discovered that desperation and sacrifice, without equivalent technological capability, could not overcome fundamental disadvantages in detection, accuracy, and automation. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The invasion of Okinawa, launched on April 1st, 1945, would provide the definitive test of kamikaze tactics against the full deployment of American radar-directed defenses. The island, located just 350 miles from the Japanese home islands, represented the final stepping stone before an invasion of Japan itself. Japanese strategic planners understood that losing Okinawa would leave the homeland vulnerable to invasion and had allocated substantial air assets to its defense, including thousands of aircraft designated for kamikaze operations. Operation Kikusui, meaning floating chrysanthemum, would launch 10 massive waves of suicide attacks between April and June, committing nearly 3,000 aircraft in what Imperial Headquarters considered Japan's last opportunity to inflict unacceptable losses on the American fleet. The American naval forces supporting the Okinawa invasion represented the largest concentration of ships ever assembled in the Pacific theater. More than 1,400 vessels, including dozens of aircraft carriers, battleships, and cruisers, supported the amphibious assault. Protecting this armada required an integrated defense system that combined carrier-based fighter aircraft with ship-based anti-aircraft guns. The outer defensive ring consisted of radar picket stations, destroyers, and smaller vessels positioned at intervals around Okinawa to provide early warning of approaching raids and to direct fighter aircraft toward incoming kamikazes before they could reach the main fleet. By April 1945, substantial numbers of SCR-584 systems had reached the Pacific theater. These systems equipped not only shore-based anti-aircraft batteries on Okinawa itself, but were also installed on larger warships, adapted for naval use with gyro stabilizers to compensate for ship motion. The Navy had modified the system for carrier use as the SM-1 fighter direction radar, while escort carriers received the SP variant. Each system extended the electromagnetic detection barrier around American forces, creating overlapping coverage zones where kamikazes could be detected, tracked, and engaged at ranges they could neither see nor counter. The first major kamikaze wave, designated Kikusui-1, launched on April 6 with nearly 400 aircraft, including approximately 300 kamikazes. American radar picket stations detected the raid while the Japanese aircraft were still forming up over Kyushu, more than 200 miles from Okinawa. Combat air patrol fighters vectored by radar to intercept destroyed dozens of kamikazes before they could approach the fleet. Those that penetrated the fighter screen encountered concentrated anti-aircraft fire directed by SCR-584 systems and proximity-fused shells. By day's end, the raid had sunk 2 destroyers and 1 landing ship, while damaging more than a dozen other vessels, but at a cost of approximately 350 Japanese aircraft destroyed. The exchange ratio demonstrated the changed mathematics of suicide warfare. Early kamikaze operations in the Philippines had achieved hit rates exceeding 30% against ships that lacked advanced radar fire control and proximity-fused ammunition. At Okinawa, with SCR-584 systems providing precise tracking data and proximity fuses detonating shells automatically when they approached aircraft, the hit rate began declining immediately. Analysis by the Navy's Operations Research Group would later calculate that during the Okinawa campaign, only 23% of kamikazes that attacked actually hit ships, while just 12% crashed close enough to cause damage. The majority, approximately 65%, were destroyed by fighters or anti-aircraft fire before reaching striking distance. These statistics revealed the impact of radar-directed defense systems. Without proximity fuzzies, Navy studies estimated that 5-inch anti-aircraft guns required approximately 1,000 shells to destroy a single attacking aircraft. With proximity fuses and radar fire control, the requirement dropped to approximately 300 rounds. The improvement represented more than ammunition efficiency. It meant that ships could engage multiple targets simultaneously, with reasonable probability of destroying attackers before they could crash into their targets. The psychological effect on defending crews proved equally important. Sailors who had felt helpless against determined suicide attacks now possessed weapons that provided genuine protection, transforming terror into confidence. For the kamikaze pilots, the experience proved devastating. Training at bases in Kyushu emphasized low-altitude approaches over water to avoid early radar detection, but the SCR-584's ability to detect aircraft at 40-mile ranges rendered this tactic ineffective. Pilots would find themselves under accurate anti-aircraft fire from distances where they could barely see their targets, let alone maneuver effectively to evade. The proximity-fused shells proved particularly demoralizing to the few pilots who survived initial attacks and returned to base due to mechanical failures. They reported that American anti-aircraft fire seemed to explode with uncanny accuracy near their aircraft, even when shells appeared to miss by substantial margins, a phenomenon they could not explain given their understanding of conventional time-fused ammunition. The radar picket destroyers, positioned at exposed stations to provide early warning, bore the heaviest burden of kamikaze attacks. These vessels, typically Fletcher-class destroyers, equipped with search radars and supported by landing craft outfitted with fighter direction equipment, detected incoming raids and vectored combat air patrol fighters toward threats. Japanese commanders, recognizing that destroying the picket stations would blind the American defense system, directed disproportionate numbers of kamikazes against these exposed ships. Yet even the destroyer escorts, smaller and more lightly armed than fleet units, benefited from proximity-fused ammunition that dramatically increased the lethality of their 5-inch guns. On April 12, 1945, during Kikusui-2, kamikaze attacks struck multiple radar picket stations simultaneously in a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm defenses. The destroyer USS Manert El Abele, stationed at Radar Picket Station 1, faced one of the war's most terrifying weapons, a rocket-powered Oka flying bomb launched from a Betty bomber. The Oka, carrying a 1,200-kilogram warhead and capable of speeds exceeding 600 miles per hour in its terminal dive, represented Japan's attempt to create a weapon too fast for American defenses to counter. One conventional kamikaze had already struck Manert El Abele when the Oka attacked, Despite proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire, the rocket bomb's extreme speed allowed it to strike the destroyer's forward fire room before defensive fire could destroy it. The explosion broke the ship in two and it sank within 5 minutes, killing 79 sailors. The loss of Manert L. Abele demonstrated that even advanced defensive systems could not guarantee complete protection against determined attacks employing the fastest weapons available. Yet the statistics from this engagement proved revealing. The Oka that sank Manert El Abele was one of only 7 launched during the Okinawa campaign, and the only one to successfully hit its target. American fighters and anti-aircraft fire destroyed the others, often shooting down the Betty bombers that carried them before the Okas could be released. The weapon, touted as impossible to intercept, proved instead to be a costly failure that sacrificed highly trained Betty crews without achieving commensurate results. Throughout April and May, subsequent Kikusui operations followed similar patterns. Japanese aircraft launched from Kyushu bases were detected by American radar while still forming up, intercepted by fighters directed to the threat, and engaged by radar-controlled anti-aircraft fire if they penetrated the fighter screen. By May 11, during Kikusui 6, American combat air patrols had achieved such effectiveness that they were destroying kamikazes at ratios exceeding 10-1 during interceptions. The few aircraft that reached the fleet faced anti-aircraft batteries that had refined their techniques through weeks of continuous combat, gunners who knew precisely how to employ their radar-directed systems for maximum effectiveness. The kamikaze campaign continued through June, but with declining effectiveness and mounting Japanese losses. Imperial headquarters had allocated approximately 4,000 aircraft for kamikaze operations during the Okinawa campaign. Of these, Navy Operations Research Group analysis estimated that approximately 2,800 were expended as kamikazes. These attacks sank 36 American ships and damaged approximately 368 others, but they failed to achieve the strategic objective of forcing American withdrawal or making the invasion prohibitively costly. The exchange ratio, measured in Japanese aircraft lost versus American ships sunk, approached 78-1. No American capital ships, no fleet carriers, no battleships, no heavy cruisers were sunk by kamikaze attack, despite thousands of sorties flown against the most concentrated naval target of the Pacific War. The price paid by American forces remained severe. Nearly 5,000 American sailors died in kamikaze attacks during the Okinawa campaign, representing the highest naval casualties suffered in any single operation of the Pacific War. Hundreds of additional sailors were wounded, many suffering horrific burns when aviation fuel from crashed kamikazes ignited fires on ship decks. The psychological trauma of facing suicide attacks, of watching determined pilots crash burning aircraft into neighboring ships, affected thousands more who survived physically uninjured. Yet these losses, grievous though they were, fell far short of the catastrophic toll Japan had hoped to inflict. American naval power remained intact, capable of supporting the invasion of Okinawa through 3 months of intensive combat and fully prepared to support subsequent operations against the Japanese home islands. Japanese commanders, receiving reports of kamikaze failure rates and mounting aircraft losses, struggled to understand why tactics that had achieved such success in the Philippines were proving increasingly ineffective. Some attributed the change to improved American fighter tactics and increased combat air patrol strength around the fleet. Others suggested that American gunners had simply gained experience in engaging suicide attackers. These explanations, while partially correct, failed to identify the fundamental cause: the technological transformation of American defensive capabilities through radar fire control and proximity-fused ammunition. Japanese intelligence services attempted to gather information about American radar capabilities through various means. They interrogated captured American aircrew, seeking technical details about radar equipment. They examined wreckage of downed American aircraft for electronic equipment that might provide clues to radar capabilities. They monitored American radio transmissions, attempting to identify frequencies and signal characteristics that might indicate radar systems. Yet these efforts produced incomplete understanding. The cavity magnetron that enabled microwave radar remained beyond Japanese understanding. The proximity fuse, carefully protected by American security measures, was recovered from unexploded shells so rarely that Japanese technicians never successfully reverse-engineered its principles. The integrated system of radar, analog computer, and automated fire control represented a level of technological sophistication Japan simply could not match. After the war's end, Japanese military and technical personnel who had survived witnessed firsthand the technological gap they had faced. American occupation forces brought SCR-584 systems into Japan for air defense purposes during the initial occupation period. Japanese engineers and military officers, granted access to examine these systems under controlled circumstances, finally understood the capabilities they had faced. Reports prepared for the Japanese government and military documented the shock of this recognition. The SCR-584 could detect aircraft at ranges 3 to 4 times greater than the best Japanese search radars. Its automatic tracking accuracy exceeded anything Japanese fire control systems could achieve through manual operation. The integration with the M9 director and proximity-fused shells created an automated defense system that Japanese industry, even with years of development time and unlimited resources, would have struggled to replicate. Several Japanese naval officers and engineers who participated in post-war technical examinations provided candid assessments. The kamikaze tactics, they concluded, had been doomed from the moment American forces deployed integrated radar fire control systems in significant numbers. The early successes in the Philippines had occurred against ships equipped with older radar systems, before proximity fuses became widely available, and before American defenders had optimized their tactics for countering suicide attacks. By Okinawa, every advantage that had made kamikazes effective had been systematically eliminated by American technology and doctrine. The final accounting of the kamikaze campaign told a story of courage without effect, of desperate sacrifice that achieved tactical inconvenience without strategic consequence. Japan launched approximately 2,800 kamikaze sorties during the Okinawa campaign. American forces shot down approximately 2,000 of these aircraft before they could attack. Of the roughly 800 that pressed attacks, fewer than 200 actually hit ships. Of those hits, approximately 36 resulted in ships sinking, representing a success rate, measured from launch to sinking, of approximately 1.3%. These statistics meant that for every American ship sunk by kamikaze attack, Japan expended approximately 78 aircraft and pilots, losses that proved unsustainable even for a nation facing invasion. The broader implications extended beyond the immediate tactical failure. The kamikaze campaign had consumed Japan's remaining trained pilots and operational aircraft at rates that left the air forces incapable of meaningful resistance to the anticipated invasion of the home islands. By August 1945, when Japan surrendered following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the combined fleet and army air forces had been reduced to approximately 5,500 aircraft, many unserviceable and crewed by pilots with minimal training. Plans for Operation Ketsugo, the defense of Japan proper, had called for launching these remaining aircraft in final kamikaze attacks against invasion fleets. Yet the Okinawa experience had demonstrated that even 10,000 kamikazes could not prevent American forces from taking their objectives when opposed by integrated radar-directed defenses. The SCR-584 and its associated technologies represented more than incremental improvement in defensive capability. They exemplified the decisive advantage that advanced technology, produced at scale and integrated into effective doctrine, provides over opponents who lack equivalent capability. Japanese pilots, however brave and determined, could not overcome fundamental disadvantages in detection range, tracking accuracy, and automated fire control. Their courage, while admirable from a human perspective, proved militarily irrelevant against defenses they could neither see, understand, nor counter. The technological gap between American and Japanese radar capabilities at war's end exceeded 5 years in some areas, a chasm that would take Japan decades to bridge during post-war reconstruction. American radar technology, developed through massive investment by the Radiation Laboratory and produced by industries with deep expertise in electronics manufacturing, had progressed through multiple generations during the war years. Each generation incorporated improvements based on combat experience, scientific advances, and manufacturing innovations that increased performance while reducing cost. This virtuous cycle of development, testing, production, and feedback, enabled by American industrial capacity and scientific infrastructure, created military technology that Japan could not match, regardless of effort or sacrifice. The SCR-584 itself remained in service for decades after the war, a testament to its advanced design and robust construction. The United States Army continued using these systems as primary anti-aircraft radars through the 1950s. Modified versions tracked early space launches and provided fire control for Nike surface-to-air missile systems. Soviet engineers, through captured German technical documentation and espionage, developed derivative systems including the SON-9 and SON-30 radars that would oppose American aircraft during the Korean and Vietnam Wars. The principles embodied in the SCR-584, microwave radar for precision tracking, servo mechanisms for automated following, and integration with computing systems for fire control, became fundamental features of all subsequent radar-directed weapons systems. For the families of kamikaze pilots who died in the Okinawa campaign, the post-war revelation of American technological capabilities provided context, though little comfort, for their losses. These young men, some barely 20 years old, had volunteered or been coerced into flying missions that contemporary Japanese military leadership knew were desperate measures, lacking reasonable probability of success. They had been told they were defending their nation, that their sacrifice would delay or prevent American invasion, that their deaths would have meaning. Instead, they died attacking through an invisible barrier of electromagnetic radiation that detected them before they could see their targets and destroyed them with automated precision they could not comprehend. The mathematics were clear and brutally simple when examined objectively. American industrial capacity, scientific expertise, and technological innovation had created defensive systems that rendered kamikaze tactics obsolete before they could achieve strategic effect. The courage to die for one's nation, unmatched by equivalent technological capability, could not overcome the fundamental advantages provided by radar that saw over the horizon, computers that calculated faster than humans, and proximity fuses that detonated automatically at optimal range. Japan had discovered, through the costliest possible education, that modern warfare rewards industrial sophistication and scientific advancement more heavily than individual sacrifice and tactical desperation. Lieutenant Junior Grade Seki Yukio, the pilot whose Zero disintegrated in the opening paragraphs of this account, represented the face of this tragedy. He and 4,000 other kamikaze pilots died during the Okinawa campaign, their aircraft torn apart by proximity-fused shells directed by radar systems they did not know existed. Their sacrifice, however honored in Japanese memory, changed nothing strategically. American forces took Okinawa, established bases for the invasion of Japan, and demonstrated that even Japan's most desperate tactics could not prevent inevitable defeat when facing overwhelming technological and industrial superiority. The SCR-584 radar system, that 6-foot dish antenna, rotating atop its trailer, represented something more profound than technological achievement. It embodied the decisive advantage of nations that invest in science and industry over those that prioritize individual sacrifice and tactical innovation. It demonstrated that courage and determination, however admirable as human qualities, cannot overcome systematic disadvantages in detection, calculation, and automation. Most fundamentally, it proved that wars between industrialized powers are won or lost, not primarily on battlefields where brave men die, but in laboratories where scientists innovate, factories where workers produce, and command centers, where leaders understand that technology multiplied by industrial capacity determines victory more certainly than courage multiplied by desperation. The kamikaze pilots never had a chance, not because they lacked courage or determination or skill, but because they attacked enemies who possessed technological capabilities their own nation could not match and industrial capacity their own nation could not approach. They flew into electromagnetic barriers they could not see, seeking targets protected by automated defenses they could not understand, dying by the thousands in pursuit of strategic objectives their sacrifice could not achieve. The SCR-584 and the integrated defense system it enabled had rendered their tactics obsolete before the Okinawa campaign began. Their commanders, lacking equivalent technology and facing inevitable defeat, sent them to die anyway. That tragedy, more than the technological achievement it opposed, remains the essential story of the Kamikaze campaign. Young men sacrificed to desperation when their nation's leaders could offer nothing else. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.